Hello, everyone. Debbie Bird Smith here with another installment of our book that we're going through, Son of My Will. And we've gotten to, let's see, up to chapter 5. And I am enjoying all of your comments. And I hope that you're sharing this with people also, because this is a wonderful book. It's so nice to learn about the culture of the time, sort of the politics of the time, and really all that Luisa went through in her uh, really in her victim soul martyrdom. And so we're on chapter 5, and the title of this chapter is The First Mystical Marriage. And it begins with the preparation. Now, normally I go for about 30 minutes. We'll see where we're at. I don't think we'll get through the entire chapter, so this chapter may come in two different installments as well. But I'm trying to put these a little bit closer together so that, they're a little bit more, you don't forget what you just read before we get to the next part. And I hope that you're subscribed. If you're not, I would ask you if you could please subscribe and just hit the notification bell. You'll notice every time that I do post a video, whether it's me or it's Dan or it's another guest, whatever. You'll know that it's coming. So let's begin. Preparation. Is there a reason behind Luisa Picaretta's way of life? The answer lies in what will become her mission. The Lord explains it to her by saying he wants to prepare her for a mystical marriage with him, and by asking her to participate not only in suffering for the offenses that he receives from mankind, but also in the joy of a union in which everything will be in common. Jesus keeps telling her this over and over again as if Luisa had not quite grasped it. That from this point on, his afflictions, his suffering, his consolation will become Luisa's, and hers will become his. They will unite all of their cares and concerns and their own things in such a way that it will no longer be possible to say, this is mine and this is yours, but everything will be in common for the two of them. The bridegroom requests are not late in coming, and they are very clear and demanding. Jesus wants from Luisa perfect conformity to his will, making sure that his will and Luisa's coincide. On top of that, an absolute detachment from everything is necessary so that Luisa will consider everything that is earth to be like dung and rot and horrible just to look at. Even if Luisa, in fact, does not have a particular attachment to the things of the world, just having them around and seeing them casts a shadow on the things of heaven and hinders the fulfillment of that promised mystical marriage. Jesus also wants to be imitated in his earthly poverty. Luisa must consider herself in her bed as a poor little thing who is happy with everything she has, thanking Jesus first and then her benefactors, welcoming everything that is given to her without asking for anything and without thinking as to whether it will do her good or bad. She must comply with the will of others with holy indifference. Mystical marriage in the lives of mystics and Luisa. At this point, let us take a brief digression in order to grasp better what the Lord is offering Luisa when he tells her he is preparing her for a mystical marriage. Ever since ancient times, the image of marriage between a man and a woman has been seen in religious writing to express the union between God and his people. God's ancient covenant with his chosen people carries with it a nuptial nature, and as a consequence, idolatry is seen as adultery. The New Testament often reiterates that God has always kept his love for Israel, even though they betrayed him with idols. Through the prophet Hosea, he affirms, I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me with justice and with judgment, with loyalty and with compassion. It's from Hosea 2:21. In the New Testament, with the new and everlasting covenant fulfilled in the mystery of Christ's death and resurrection, Jesus identifies himself as the bridegroom. Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? In other verses, Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a wedding feast given by a king for his son, and speaks of the virgins who went out to meet the bridegroom. St. Paul uses the marital relationship to characterize the Christ-church relationship, which includes all members of the church, the people who journeyed together in history over the centuries. The theme is taken up by various ancient writers. For example, there are those who say that Tertullian, who lived between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, that when the soul comes to the faith, it is received by the Holy Spirit. The flesh accompanies the soul to the marriage with the Spirit. Others, too, like Origen, say that Christ is the bridegroom with whom the soul unites when it comes to the faith. Then there is someone like Didymus the blind, who says that he who made our soul takes it for his bride in the baptismal pool. There is full conformity between the Christian soul and the Word, and this soul is united in matrimony to the Word, according to St. Bernard. Therefore, if God finds a person willing to live with him in profound union, in conformity to Christ's death and resurrection, he brings about a spiritual marriage in which the union of wills is perfect and the love very strong, so much so that the two can no longer be separated. Precisely because the person no longer wants to be separated from him, the person shares in his plan for humanity, which is what Christ put into effect by coming to dwell among humanity. It is the full realization of the creature, breaking all the chains of sin by which man may be shackled because of his freedom. Why is it then that we see so much evil around us? Why do people not let themselves be led by God so they can quench their thirst for happiness? Good question. St. John of the Cross, a great saint mentioned earlier, asked the same question. And after much experience in watching how both people and God operate, he even came up with an answer. He said, the people do not achieve this marriage or union with God for various reasons. Either they do not realize that God can unite them to himself in a mystical marriage. They can be experienced by everyone in a perceptible way, or they do not know about it at all. Or perhaps they do not want it because they know that the path leading to such union is conformity to Christ, who in human terms is the greatest failure in history. Or perhaps they do not find spiritual direction suitable enough to respond fully to God's invitation to be with him. Nor do they have sufficient guidance to overcome the limits and defects stemming from the selfishness that humanity still carries around from original sin. The person who accepts this perfect union rediscovers God present in the depths of his or her soul. And as Christ accepted suffering in order to open the way to mankind, the person who accepts the pain involved and becomes repairer with Christ of the brokenness that sin caused in man's heart. In this context, one can understand innocent suffering, like Luisa Picaretta's, that is accepted and even desired in order to achieve greater conformity to Christ and to help the world. That all Christians must take up the cross and follow Christ is well known, but that some may bear the marks of Christ's stigmata, his wounds, as St. Paul mentions, is also a given fact. Why does Luisa fall into this category? It's a bit of a mystery, but it also reflects her generosity and the most impassioned love. Since there is no time in God and everything is all present, as when he offers the cross to young Luisa, he already knows that she will answer with a generous fiat and so he proceeds. It is true that these people can turn back at any moment, and who knows how many do, but Luisa would never have done so, and that is why. Ever since she was a child, God delights in making her feel all of his love and all of his pain. Luisa had to battle against the devil, or as Jesus calls him, the prince of this world, who since time immemorial has wanted to keep humanity from true happiness by dangling before them reflections of cheap happiness that vanish into an existential heartache, sometimes called depression, while at other times they become an escape to fleeting pleasures. Instead, this marriage brings an endless banquet because, as the Gospel according to Luke says, God is the one who celebrates when people convert and return to him, and he invites everyone to do likewise. St. John of the Cross says, it is as if the person is always in celebration, inside and out, in spite of being in the grip of physical and spiritual suffering. With regard to Luisa and many others, a deep underlying serenity exists that sometimes leaves the person dazed. It is the celebration found on a level that beckons the human being, that goes beyond the human. In any case, preparation is necessary for this marriage, as the Lord tells Luisa, by getting acquainted with the living God, with fidelity to the covenant with him, and with humility. In exchange, the person receives spiritual gifts, often undetected, that become visible in the material or spiritual service to others. This makes the difference. On the human level, many gifts are visible. On the spiritual level, most of the time, not even the person himself sees them, because compared with God's holiness, one's sins are seen much more clearly. But the spiritual vitality unleashed by the person's love serves to benefit all of humanity as well as the mystical body of Christ. This is the reality we call the communion of saints, and a kind of solidarity, a word much in use today, and that signifies an activity involving a large number of people. Today, the solidarity goes beyond selling flowers or other things in city squares in order to raise money for a particular project. We are also invited through different promotional campaigns on television to send a text message by phone for the cost of just $1, or to press a button online to donate $2. That way, dollar after dollar, a huge amount can be raised that makes us feel in solidarity with those who need help. A similar thing happens on the spiritual plane, and which on an unseen level radiates over the whole world like an electromagnetic waves that we can only detect with special instruments. The communion of saints is a reality that adds a whole different dimension to our entire life. We are never alone. We are part of a spiritual fellowship where true solidarity reigns. The good of each one is for the benefit of everyone, and vice versa. A happiness held in common shines on every individual. It is a mystery which, to some degree, we can already experience in this world, in the family, in friendship, and especially in the spiritual community of the Church, which Luisa enriches thanks to her mystical marriage. The marriage in nature, where the two of them become one body, is only a shadow of mystical marriage, where they will feel one with a union of affection and of perfect will. Certainly, just looking around us, there do not seem to be many marriages where there is a perfect union of wills between husband and wife. But may not that also be the reason God revealed in Luisa how the perfect union of wills is possible? Can people perhaps figure out that Jesus is asking her for the perfect union of will with him in order to show that it is precisely in that union with him that two human wills, sustained by the sacrament of marriage, can become one as well, even between two very unique and different individuals. Isn't this the truth, though? We see two people who, they say opposites attract. Sometimes you see two people who are on the surface seem extraordinarily different, and yet they have this union in marriage, this soul connection, really, that holds it all together despite all their differences. They have this union of souls. Immediate preparation. Let's return to Luisa Picaretta and her mystical marriage. Jesus continues to prepare her, letting himself be seen while Luisa is immobile, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, like one in love who cannot be without his spouse. Jesus would come to Luisa sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, and they would talk. He would teach her. They would converse. This is why we read, I think, so many times, if Jesus doesn't show up, she's kind of like, where is he? Where are you? Where'd you go? About 3 months had gone by from the time Luisa stopped leaving her bed, and Jesus shows her a very special outpouring of love to console her in her suffering, especially when her confessor is late in coming to free her from her usual state. Reminder, her usual state is basically comatose. It's basically dead. Her body is hard as a rock. She's not conscious. She doesn't regain any mobility or consciousness until the priest, her confessor, comes and touches her, blesses her. Obviously, he encourages her spiritually, but also physically, in that he declares he wants to be her nourishment for both the soul and the body. So when she was in these states, these are the times that she's with Jesus. These are the times that she's conversing with Jesus. She comes out of her body, soul leaves her body, and she is communing with Jesus. And he encourages her. He says, we read earlier that when she thought that Jesus said that she had to stay in bed, she thought that that was going to be for 90 days. She thought that was going to be for like 3 months. And the confessor agreed to that because he thought it was going to be for 3 months. They did not know that it was going to be for the rest of her life. This is the exact period when, for the first time, Jesus lets Luisa experience her soul leaving her body. The reason for letting her soul leave her body is explained by the bridegroom's desire to always be with the bride. If up until now it has been Jesus coming to Luisa, now it's Luisa who must go to Jesus. These ecstasies will become ever more frequent, will be for Luisa a real and true learning experience. In their various wanderings together, she finds out just how offended Jesus is by dishonesty, swearing, the lack of charity, and above all by false piety in the churches, with holy works done half-heartedly and with Holy Communion received without the proper inner disposition. In particular, it is the terrible interior state of priests that make the Lord suffer the most. They're celebrating Mass in a state of mortal sin, or in a routine way, and in some cases, only out of self-interest. In all of this, Luisa shares Jesus' pain by offering herself as victim. Despite so many terrible things that Luisa sees, there are plenty of occasions where they encounter holy priests whose ministries appear to her in all of their sublime nature. New light is shed on her understanding of the significance of the Eucharistic celebration. She learns that the entire foundation of our sacrosanct religion is contained in the Mass. The Mass says everything and speaks about everything because it recalls the redemption and the pains that Jesus suffered for humanity. It also manifests his immense love, not content with dying on the cross. He wanted to continue his state of victim in the Eucharist. The Mass also says that our wrecked bodies, reduced to ashes by death, will rise again on the day of judgment together with Christ to immortal and glorious life. Now, I think I may stop there. Our next section is on the celebration of marriage in 1888. And so in this section, we're going to hear about this nuptial union that happens between Jesus and Luisa. And continuing with this Jesus meticulous preparation and this suffering that she's been prepared for and that she's more than willing to do. This is her call. This is her mission, is to become, as was Faustina, the secretary of the divine will, but much more, she received the gift of living in the divine will. And so Jesus needed to show her and to teach her many of the things he was trying to explain to her. And one of the things that he was trying to explain to her was just sort of the wretchedness of our souls, the how we don't do justice, don't appreciate so many of the things that Jesus has given us through the church. And also to show her that some people don't understand mystical marriage because maybe they don't seek it because they don't want it. Maybe they don't seek it because they understand it. They don't understand it. Some people don't seek it because they never heard of it. St. John of the Cross, as was mentioned earlier, he and Teresa of Avila talked at great length about union with God. How is that possible? How do we achieve that? And I love the way that he equates that in some ways to the sacrament of marriage. Marriage is supposed to be the union of two lives, two souls, really. So the two become one. But in so many cases, we can see that that does not happen. It doesn't happen for a variety of reasons, but people marry for different reasons. Sometimes people marry for security. Sometimes people marry for love. Sometimes people marry for money. Sometimes people marry for children. Sometimes people marry for social status. Many marriages, and this is the sad state that we find ourselves in, is that they just weren't entered into for the right reasons. And this is why the church says, well, we're going to take a look at all of this. Because if you didn't enter into your marriage for the purpose of union and for the purpose of unity with God, you were barking up the wrong tree, whatever it was. So next time we'll be talking about, the section starts out 1888, the marriage celebration. And he told her at the beginning of 1888 that this was going to happen. And it happened on October the 21st of 1888. We can remember that date, and we're going to talk about that date in our next installment of The Son of My Will. I'm trying not to read too much at once because, number one, I don't want to, we're all limited in time. But it gives us a chance to absorb what we need to absorb about these writings. But one of the things that I think is most significant about this particular reading is to understand, because I think a lot of people do not understand, all of Luisa's writings, or most of them anyway, begin with, as I was in my usual state. What's her usual state? Her usual state is in this, she's talking about this state where she bilocates to Jesus. She bilocates, she's in this state where her soul leaves her body. And there's the story about Luisa and her dear sister Angela. Oh my goodness, another saint in heaven. Take care of her. But sometimes in the morning, after she would take these flights with Jesus in the heavens, and he would take her around and show her everything, all of his creation, not just the earth, but all of creation. And she would come back with dirty socks. Now, she never got out of bed. There's no reason for her to have dirty socks. But she had in her mystical body, in her soul journeys, who knows where they went, who knows what they did, but she saw a lot of things, and and Jesus did this to help her understand suffering and the wretchedness of the world, and what he needed her to do, and what he needed her to learn, so that she could help others, and write this 10,000 pages on his lessons. So, with that in mind, until next time, I hope you'll all remember to stay in his will. Bye-bye.